Single dad saved his boss and rushed her to the ER, then she wrote his name on the form. The moment the woman collapsed, everyone in the executive hallway froze. Phones stopped ringing. Footsteps stopped echoing. Even the people who had spent years working beside her seemed suddenly helpless. She lay unconscious on the polished marble floor, her expensive white suit stained with a small streak of coffee, while employees stood around her whispering in panic. Then one man stepped forward. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even supposed to be in that part of the building. He was a single father who had been hired to maintain the offices after hours. But within seconds, he dropped everything, lifted his boss into his arms, and ran toward the elevators as if her life depended on every second. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and helping someone when they need you most, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You never know when one small act of kindness might change someone's entire life. His name was Daniel Carter. At 36, Daniel had learned not to expect life to be easy. 3 years earlier, he had lost his wife after a sudden illness, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, alone. Since then, he had worked whatever jobs he could find. During the day, he repaired machines and delivered supplies when work was available. At night, he cleaned offices at Carter & Blake Financial, one of the most prestigious companies in the city. Daniel didn't complain. He couldn't afford to. Every morning, he packed Lily's lunch, walked her to school, and reminded her that difficult days didn't mean a difficult life. Then he went to work wearing the same few carefully washed shirts and carrying the quiet exhaustion of a man who had learned to hide his worries behind a smile. His boss, Victoria Blake, was the opposite of Daniel in almost every way. She was the company's brilliant CEO, known for her discipline, confidence, and intimidating presence. Employees lowered their voices when she walked through the hallway. Managers prepared entire presentations before entering her office. Daniel rarely spoke to her beyond a polite greeting when he cleaned the executive floor. To Victoria, he was simply Daniel, the dependable night employee who never missed a shift. But one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Daniel had come to the building earlier than usual because Lily's school had closed unexpectedly. He had arranged for a neighbor to watch her for a few hours while he worked, promising that he would be home before dinner. He was pushing a cleaning cart through the executive corridor when he heard a sharp crash from Victoria's office. He looked up. Then he heard someone gasp. Daniel dropped the cart and ran. Victoria was stumbling out of her office, one hand gripping the wall. Her face had turned frighteningly pale. She tried to take another step, but her knees suddenly gave way. She collapsed onto the marble floor. Several employees gathered around her, but nobody knew what to do. Someone called emergency services. Another employee stood frozen with a phone in his hand. Daniel immediately knelt beside Victoria and checked whether she was breathing. She was, but weakly. The elevator was too slow. The hallway seemed endless. Daniel carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but the fear inside his chest felt unbearably heavy. He carried her toward the emergency exit, shouting for someone to open the doors. Employees stared as the janitor carried the company's powerful CEO through the building. The man everyone usually ignored had suddenly become the only person moving. Outside, traffic crawled along the street. The ambulance was still several minutes away. Daniel knew those minutes could matter. He ran toward the company vehicle parked near the entrance and yelled for the security guard to unlock it. The guard hesitated, but Daniel didn't wait. He placed Victoria carefully inside and drove toward the nearest emergency room, keeping one hand on the steering wheel and repeatedly checking that she was breathing. For the first time in years, Daniel prayed. Not for himself. Not for money. Not for a better job. He prayed for a woman who barely knew his name. At the hospital, nurses rushed Victoria away on a stretcher. Daniel stood in the emergency hallway, breathing heavily, his hands trembling. His shirt was wrinkled, his sleeves were stained, and one of his shoes had come loose during the frantic drive. Then a nurse approached him with a clipboard. She asked him who he was. Daniel gave his name. She asked about his relationship to Victoria. Daniel paused. He almost laughed at the question. He was only her employee. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't important. He simply said that he worked for her and had brought her to the hospital. The nurse thanked him and disappeared through the emergency doors. Daniel sat alone. His phone vibrated. It was Lily. She wanted to know when he was coming home. Daniel closed his eyes and promised her he would be there soon. Hours passed. Finally, a doctor came through the doors and told Daniel that Victoria was stable. She had suffered a serious medical episode, but getting her to the hospital quickly had likely prevented something far worse. Daniel felt his shoulders finally relax. He stood to leave. But before he could reach the exit, the doctor stopped him. Victoria wanted to see him. Daniel entered the hospital room expecting to see the same powerful woman who had commanded conference rooms and intimidated executives. Instead, he saw someone completely different. Victoria looked exhausted and vulnerable. Her eyes were wet. She reached for a clipboard on the table beside her. Daniel noticed a hospital form in her hand. The nurse had asked for the name of the person who had brought her in. Victoria had written it herself. Daniel Carter. Underneath his name, she had written something else. Emergency contact. Daniel stared at the page. He couldn't understand. Victoria looked at him and explained that she had realized something that day. She had spent years believing that success meant surrounding herself with important people, yet when she collapsed, the people with expensive suits and impressive titles had stood frozen. The person who had acted without hesitation was the man she had barely noticed. Daniel quietly told her that anyone would have done the same. Victoria shook her head. She told him that wasn't true. Then she admitted something that broke Daniel's heart. She had recently learned that her own father had been taken to a hospital years earlier, and she had been too busy with work to answer his calls. By the time she arrived, it was too late. She had spent years building a company because she thought achievement could fill the emptiness she carried inside. Daniel looked at her and said nothing. He understood that kind of emptiness. He carried his own. Victoria asked about Lily. Daniel was surprised she knew his daughter's name. She told him she had seen Lily once in the lobby and remembered the little girl waiting patiently for her father after school. Then Victoria made a decision that Daniel never expected. She offered him a permanent position, not as a cleaner, but as facilities and operations coordinator, with better pay, health benefits, and hours that would allow him to be home with Lily every evening. Daniel almost refused. He didn't want charity. Victoria told him it wasn't charity. It was recognition. She had spent years looking for talent in resumes and boardrooms, while overlooking the character standing quietly in front of her. Months later, Daniel still kept the old hospital form. He kept it inside the same folder where he stored Lily's school certificates and photographs. Whenever life became difficult, he looked at the page. Not because his boss had written his name on it, but because that was the day someone finally saw him. Daniel had entered that hospital believing he was nobody important. He left knowing that sometimes the people who feel invisible are the very people holding others together. And Victoria never forgot the lesson either. She began treating employees differently. She learned their names. She asked about their families. She listened when someone said they were struggling. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she collapsed, she quietly donated to a children's charity in Lily's name. Because one frightened single father had reminded her that success means very little if you don't have a heart left to share it with. And Daniel learned something too. Life doesn't always change with a miracle. Sometimes it changes with one brave decision. One open hand. One person refusing to walk away. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and subscribe for more stories about hope, courage, and second chances. Before you leave, comment, "Kindness changes lives," if you believe that one small act can make a difference in someone's world. Because Daniel thought he was simply saving his boss that afternoon. He never realized that, in saving her life, he was also opening the door to a new life for himself and his daughter.